The first thing Adrian Cole said to me wasn't hello. It was, "You have 11 days before I decide you're wrong for this job. Most of them don't make it past 4. I stood in the marble foyer of a house that cost more than my entire life, holding a duffel bag with 2 shirts and a resume nobody had actually read, and I said the only thing that came to mind. Then I guess I better make the first 10 days count." He didn't smile. He just looked at me the way you look at something you've already decided to return. I didn't know yet that 9 men and 1 woman had stood exactly where I was standing, in the exact same spot on that cold gray marble, and every single one of them had been gone within 8 weeks. I didn't know that the housekeeper, a quiet woman named Marisol, would later tell me in a voice just above a whisper that Mr. Cole didn't fire people because they were bad at the job. He fired them because they got too good at being needed. I didn't understand what that meant, not yet. 3 weeks later, I would find him standing in his daughter's doorway at 2 in the morning, not moving, not speaking, just watching her sleep like he was afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. And when I asked him what was wrong, he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, not the boardroom face, not the cold, transactional face he wore for everyone in that house, something underneath it. Something that looked a lot like grief wearing the mask of control. He said, "You should go back to bed, Noah." But he didn't move away when I stepped closer. That was the first time I understood there was a version of Adrian Cole that nobody else had ever been allowed to see, and I had no idea yet what it would cost either of us to find it. My name is Noah Bennett. I was 29 years old, broke, freshly graduated with a degree in early childhood development that had earned me exactly 0 job offers that paid rent. And I was 3 days away from moving back into my aunt's spare room in Ohio when the staffing agency called about a live-in position for a 6-year-old girl named Lily Cole. They didn't tell me much, just that the father was difficult, that the pay was absurd, that I should not under any circumstances expect to last long. "He's not cruel," the recruiter told me over the phone, her voice careful, like she was choosing each word around a hole in the middle of the story. "He's just particular. 10 nannies in 8 weeks. That's not normal, Noah." I needed the money too badly to care about normal. Adrian Cole was 34 years old and worth, according to a magazine profile I'd read on the drive over, more money than I could picture in real terms. He'd built a biotech company from a garage into a name people said out loud with respect. He was also, according to the same article, one of the most private men in American business. No public relationships, no interviews about his personal life, a single photograph of him and his daughter at a charity gala, and even in that photo his expression gave away nothing. The house was outside Austin, glass and stone and impossible quiet, the kind of quiet that costs money. Lily was small for 6, with her father's dark hair and a seriousness in her eyes that no child should have. She didn't run to greet me. She stood behind her father's leg and studied me the way you'd study a stranger who might be dangerous. "This is Noah," Adrian told her, crouching to her height. "He's going to help take care of you for a while." "The others," Lily said, not a question, a fact she already knew the answer to. Something crossed Adrian's face there and gone so fast I almost missed it. "We'll see," he said. That night after Lily was asleep, Adrian found me in the kitchen making tea I didn't really want, just something to do with my hands in a house that felt too big to stand still in. "Rules," he said, sliding a printed sheet across the counter without preamble. "Read them tonight. I don't repeat myself twice." There were 14 rules, most of them were reasonable. Bedtime schedules, allergy information, emergency contacts. Rule 11 stopped me. "Do not discuss Lily's other father. Do not answer questions about him from Lily, from staff, or from anyone outside this house." I looked up. "She has another father?" Adrian's jaw tightened, just barely, a small muscle moving under skin that otherwise gave nothing away. "That's Rule 11, he said. "You don't ask about it, you just follow it." He walked out before I could say anything else. I lay awake that night in the guest wing, staring at a ceiling I couldn't afford to look at, thinking about the way his voice had changed on that one rule. Every other rule he delivered like a man reading a grocery list. Rule 11 he delivered like it hurt to say out loud. I didn't know yet that I'd just found the first thread of the thing that would unravel both of us. The next few weeks moved in a rhythm I started to understand. Adrian left for the office before Lily woke up and usually returned after she was already in bed, which meant most days it was just the 2 of us, me and a 6-year-old girl who tested every new adult in her life like she was daring them to leave. I didn't take the bait. I made her pancakes shaped like the states she was learning about in her online tutoring sessions. I let her win at chess exactly as often as she deserved to, which was more often than I expected, because she was smart in a way that made me forget she was 6. I sat outside her door during thunderstorms without making it a whole thing, just present, just there, until her breathing slowed and she fell back asleep. 3 weeks in, Adrian came home early. I heard the front door at 6:30, unusually early for him, and I found him standing in the kitchen doorway watching Lily and me finish a puzzle spread across the floor. 400 pieces of a picture of Yellowstone that we were losing badly. He didn't say anything. He just watched. Lily looked up and saw him, and her whole face changed, lit up in a way it never did for me, and she ran to him and he caught her like he'd been waiting his whole life for exactly that moment. "Daddy no let me put in the wrong piece on purpose so I'd feel smart," she announced, betraying me instantly. Adrian said, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I watched something close to a smile try to happen on his face before he caught it and put it away again. That was the first time he looked at me like I was a person and not a liability. It didn't last. 2 days later I made a mistake. Small, innocent, the kind of mistake anyone would make. Lily had asked me out of nowhere while we were making dinner whether her other dad had liked pasta too. I didn't answer the question. I remembered Rule 11. But I hesitated just for a second, just long enough to be caught hesitating, and Adrian walked into the kitchen at exactly that moment and saw the hesitation on my face and understood immediately what had almost happened. He didn't yell. He never yelled. That almost made it worse. "Lily, go wash up for dinner," he said, and his voice was so even it scared me more than shouting would have. When she was gone, he turned to me. "You were about to answer her." "I didn't," I said. "I stopped myself." "You hesitated." "That's the same thing to a 6-year-old. She reads hesitation like a book." "No, she's been reading it her whole life because everyone around her hesitates the second his name almost comes up. His name, not the topic, not that subject. His name, like there was a specific person living behind Rule 11, a shape in the dark that Adrian refused to name out loud even in anger. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, but I also couldn't stop myself from adding, "but she's going to ask again." "Kids don't stop asking questions just because the answer is hard. Then she'll keep not getting an answer," he said. "That's not your decision to make." I agreed. "It's not, but somebody's going to have to make it eventually. You can't build a wall around one sentence forever." I thought that might be the end of it. I thought I'd just talked myself out of a job in week 3, one more name added to the list of 10. Instead, Adrian looked at me for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that I couldn't read yet, and then he said quietly, "You're the first one who's argued with me about it instead of just apologizing and backing off." "That bad? I don't know yet," he said and walked away, and I stood there in the kitchen replaying the sentence, trying to figure out if I'd just been fired in code. I hadn't been. That was the beginning of something neither of us had a name for. Over the following month, the house changed in small, almost invisible ways. Adrian started coming home earlier, not every night, but enough that I noticed the pattern. He started eating dinner at the table instead of in his office. He started asking me questions that had nothing to do with Lily's schedule, questions about where I grew up, why I'd chosen early childhood development, what I wanted out of a life that clearly wasn't going to look like his. I told him about growing up in foster care myself, 4 different homes between the ages of 8 and 16, and how the only thing that made those years survivable was a single foster mother, my 5th placement, who actually saw me instead of just managing me. I told him that was why I did this work, because somebody had once done it for me, and I understood exactly how much it mattered to be the person a kid could trust when nobody else in their life felt safe. Adrian listened to all of it without interrupting, which I would learn later was rare for him, a man used to running every conversation he was part of. "You never asked to be fostered out," he said finally. "But you turned it into the thing you do for other kids, that's..." He stopped like the sentence had gone away from him. "That's not nothing. What about you?" I asked. "You never told me how you built all this, just that you did." Something shuddered behind his eyes, fast like a door closing on a room he didn't let anyone into. "That's a longer story," he said. "Ask me again sometime." He didn't say not now. He said sometime, and for a man who'd built Rule 11 into an iron wall, that felt like an invitation, even if neither of us said it out loud. It was around this time I started noticing the things I shouldn't have been noticing. The way Adrian's eyes found me across a room before he seemed to realize he was doing it. The way he stood a careful, deliberate distance from me whenever Marisol or one of the other staff was nearby. A distance that disappeared entirely when it was just us. The way he remembered things I'd mentioned only once, offhand, weeks earlier, my favorite coffee order, the fact that I got quiet during storms because they reminded me of a bad placement when I was 11, the specific way I liked my eggs. A man who forgot nothing about his business meetings was somehow forgetting nothing about me either. And then there was the night of the gala. Adrian had a black tie fundraiser for his company's charitable foundation, and Lily had a fever that wouldn't break. And at the last minute his assistant called in sick, so I ended up being the one who drove him to the venue because Lily refused to let anyone else put her to bed, and Adrian had already agreed she could stay up until he left. In the car in the dark, in a silence that felt different than his usual silences, Adrian said, "Thank you for tonight," with her fever. "You didn't have to stay that extra hour. She's scared when she's sick," I said. "Somebody should be scared with her instead of just managing it." He looked at me then, really looked, in a way that made the air in the car feel thinner. Very good at seeing what people actually need, he said. It's unsettling, honestly. Unsettling, because it means you'll eventually see the things I don't want anyone to see. I should have let that sit. Instead I said, is that Rule 11 again? He almost laughed. Almost. Everything eventually comes back to Rule 11 in this house. Maybe the rule's the problem, I said. Not the question. He didn't answer. But he also didn't argue, and for Adrian Cole that silence was its own kind of confession. At the gala I waited in the car because I wasn't dressed for it and hadn't been asked to attend, just to drive. But 20 minutes in, Marisol called my cell in a panic. Lily's fever had spiked, and I had to go inside to find Adrian. The ballroom was exactly what I expected. Chandeliers and old money and 100 conversations happening at once, and I spotted Adrian near the center of it, a glass of something amber in his hand, laughing at something a silver-haired man beside him had said, except it wasn't a real laugh. I'd spent 2 months learning the difference. This was the laugh he performed, nothing like the rare, unguarded one I'd started to earn from him at the kitchen table over bad puzzle pieces. When he saw me across the room, his expression changed instantly, real concern replacing performed charm in half a second. Noah, he said, already moving toward me, ignoring whatever conversation he'd been in the middle of. What happened? Lily's fever's up, 102. Marisol's worried. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He set his glass down on the nearest surface and was already walking toward the exit before I finished the sentence, and I had to jog to keep pace with him. Car driving too fast through the dark, he said, mostly to himself. I should never have gone tonight. You can't predict a fever. I can predict that I always end up somewhere else when she needs me, he said, and there was something raw in his voice I hadn't heard before, something that sounded less like a billionaire's frustration and more like an old wound getting pressed on. That's the pattern. That's always the pattern. Adrian, that's not fair to yourself. You don't know the whole story, he said. You don't know what it cost the last time I wasn't there. I didn't push. But I filed the sentence away. Another piece of the wall Rule 11 had been built to protect. Lily was fine. A common flu, a fever that broke by morning after medicine, and a cool cloth, and her father sitting beside her bed until 4 in the morning, refusing to leave even when I offered to take a shift. I found them there at dawn, Adrian asleep, sitting up in a chair he'd pulled beside her bed, his hand still resting on top of hers even in sleep. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, just watching. Not because it was strange, because it was the opposite of strange, because it looked like exactly what love was supposed to look like, and I hadn't expected to feel my chest ache at the sight of it. That was the moment I understood I wasn't just falling for how he loved his daughter. I was falling for him. It terrified me, mostly because I still didn't know if what I was seeing from him was the same thing, or just a lonely man leaning on the nearest steady person in a house full of people who left. 2 days later, everything shifted again. I was in the study organizing files for Lily's school applications when I found it. Not snooping, just filing exactly where Adrian had told me to put paperwork. A photograph slipped between 2 folders like it had been hidden there on purpose and forgotten on accident. Adrian, younger, maybe 5 years younger, standing on a beach with his arm around another man. Both of them laughing at something outside the frame. And between them, small enough to still be a toddler, Lily. The other man had kind eyes and an easy smile, the opposite of Adrian's careful, guarded expression even in a candid moment like this one. I didn't need Rule 11 explained to me anymore. I understood exactly whose face I was looking at. I put the photo back exactly where I'd found it and told myself it wasn't my business. That lasted about 6 hours. That night after Lily was asleep, I found Adrian on the back terrace, a glass of scotch untouched in front of him, staring out at nothing. I found a photo today, I said, because I'd never been good at pretending I didn't know things. In the study, I wasn't looking for it. His shoulders went rigid. Which one? Beach you, Lily, as a baby, and Daniel, Adrian said, and his voice cracked on the single syllable in a way I'd never heard from him, not once in 2 months of careful, controlled sentences. His name was Daniel. He didn't tell me to drop it. He didn't invoke Rule 11. He just sat there in the dark, and after a long silence, he started talking like something in him had finally given out. We were together for 6 years. We built Lily's whole existence together, the surrogate, the nursery, all of it before she was even born. He was, Adrian's hand tightened around the glass he wasn't drinking. He was the only person who ever made me believe I was allowed to be happy instead of just successful. What happened to him? Car accident. 3 years ago. Rain, a truck that ran a light, and he was gone before the ambulance even got there. Adrian's voice had gone flat, the way voices go when a person has told themselves a story so many times it's worn smooth. I was supposed to be in that car. We were switching who picked Lily up from daycare that week, and I asked him to go instead because I had a call I didn't want to miss. A call about a funding round. That's what I traded him for. Adrian, that's not. Don't, he said, not sharp, just tired. Don't tell me it's not my fault. I've heard it from 3 therapists and it's never once made it feel less true. I sat down beside him, close enough that our shoulders almost touched, and for a long time neither of us said anything. That's why the nannies, I finally said. That's what Rule 11's really protecting. Not Lily, you. He looked at me, and in the dim terrace light his eyes were wet in a way I don't think he wanted me to see. Every person who gets close to her gets close to me too eventually, he said. And every time someone gets close to me I hear myself telling Daniel I had a call to take. I can't do that again, Noah. I can't let myself need someone and then lose them because I was somewhere else. So you fire them first, I said quietly. Before they can leave or before you can lose them, you control the ending so it can't control you. His silence was the answer. I'm not going anywhere, I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant almost anything in my life. You don't know that, Adrian said. Nobody knows that. Daniel didn't know that either the morning I asked him to switch. That's different. That was an accident. I'm talking about a choice. I'm choosing to stay. He looked at me, then really looked the way he had in the car after the gala, except there was nothing careful left in it, nothing performed. I don't know what to do with you, he said almost helplessly. You weren't supposed to make it this far. Neither were the other 10, I said, but I'm not them, he said quietly. You're really not. He didn't kiss me that night. But his hand found mine on the space between our chairs, tentative like he half expected me to pull away, and I laced my fingers through his instead, and we sat there on that terrace until the sky started to light, neither of us saying anything else that needed saying. For the next few weeks something shifted between us that we both pretended in daylight wasn't happening. At night after Lily was asleep, Adrian started finding reasons to be near me. A question about Lily's schoolwork that could have waited until morning. An offer to help me finish cleaning up the kitchen even though that had never once been part of his 14 rules. Small touches that lasted a half second too long to be accidental. The back of his hand against mine reaching for the same dish towel. His fingers brushing my shoulder as he passed behind my chair. We didn't talk about what it meant. Neither of us wanted to be the one to say it first and be wrong. But then Marisol started watching us differently. A knowing look here, a small smile there, and one afternoon she pulled me aside in the pantry and said, not unkindly, "You should be careful, Noah. He hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you since Daniel, and that man has spent 3 years convincing himself he doesn't deserve to feel that again." "I'm not trying to make him feel anything," I said. "I just work here." Marisol gave me a look that said she didn't believe that for 1 second, and honestly neither did I the first time Adrian kissed me. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't gentle in the way movies make first kisses gentle. It happened in the kitchen past midnight, both of us exhausted after Lily had a nightmare that took an hour to talk her down from. And when we finally closed her door and stepped back into the hallway, Adrian just stopped walking and looked at me like he'd run out of reasons not to. "I keep telling myself this is a mistake," he said. "Then stop telling yourself that." "Don't know how," I said, and closed the distance between us myself. The kiss was nothing careful. It was 3 years of grief and control finally cracking open, his hand fisting in the front of my shirt like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go, mine coming up to hold his face like I could keep him steady through it. When we finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead against mine, breathing hard. "I haven't done this since him," he admitted. "I didn't think I'd ever want to again." "You don't have to figure out what this is tonight," I said. "We have time," he laughed, short and humorless. "Do we? You know how this house works. I don't keep people, no. I lose them or I let them go before they can leave." "Then this time," I said, "let's just not do either." He kissed me again instead of answering, and for a few weeks that was enough. It couldn't stay that way forever. Adrian was a public figure whether he wanted to be or not, and public figures don't get to keep secrets as easily as they'd like. A photographer with a long lens and a paycheck writing on the shot caught us one evening on the back terrace. Nothing scandalous, just Adrian's hand resting against my jaw, both of us caught mid-conversation, close enough that anyone looking at the photo would understand exactly what they were seeing. It ran 2 days later under a headline that used the word mystery man, and speculated wildly about my role in the household, my background, whether I was some kind of gold digger who'd worked his way into a widower's bed. None of it true. All of it public. Adrian went into a kind of controlled panic I hadn't seen from him before, calling lawyers, calling his PR team, packing the length of his study while Lily, thankfully at school, was spared having to see any of it yet. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent," he said, more to himself than to me. "This is why I don't let people in, because the second I do it becomes a headline, it becomes something Lily has to grow up reading about, it becomes real," I said quietly. "That's what actually scares you, isn't it? Not the headline, the fact that it's true." He stopped packing. "That's not fair." "Maybe not, but I don't think I'm wrong." He didn't answer, and the silence stretched long enough that I understood with a sinking feeling exactly where this was going. "I think you should take some time off," Adrian said finally, not meeting my eyes. "A few weeks, let this die down." "Adrian, that's not what this is about, and you know it." I have a 6-year-old daughter whose life just became a tabloid story, he said, his voice rising for the first time since I'd known him. I have a board that's asking questions. I have investors who care very much about the personal life of the man they've trusted with hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't have the luxury of just letting this be simple, Noah. So I'm the 11th, I said quietly. You're going to do it too. Fire me before I can be the reason it gets worse. I'm not firing you. You're sending me away. That's the same thing with better manners. He didn't deny it. I packed a bag that night, not because he'd told me to, but because staying in a house where I wasn't wanted felt worse than the alternative. Lily cried when she found out I was leaving, in a way that made the whole thing feel like exactly the kind of loss Adrian had spent 3 years trying to protect her from, and the terrible irony of that wasn't lost on either of us. Explain it to her, Adrian said stiffly, standing in the same marble foyer where I'd first met him 2 months and what felt like a lifetime ago. Explain what exactly, that you got scared and pushed away the one person who actually stayed. That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened, I said. You didn't lose me to a bad headline, Adrian. You're choosing to lose me. There's a difference and you know it better than anyone. He didn't stop me at the door. I told myself, walking to the rideshare waiting outside, that I understood. That grief does strange things to people, that fear wears the mask of protection, that a man who'd spent 3 years punishing himself for a phone call wasn't going to unlearn that in 8 weeks just because I'd asked him to. I told myself all of that. It didn't make the drive away from that house hurt any less. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. I stayed with a friend in the city, checked my phone too many times a day out of habit I couldn't break, and tried to convince myself that this was for the best, that I dodged something that was never going to end well anyway. Then Marisol called. You need to come back, she said without preamble. Marisol, I don't think. He's not eating, no, he barely sleeps. Lily asks about you every single day and he doesn't have an answer that doesn't make her cry. This isn't him protecting anyone. This is him falling apart and calling it discipline. Made his choice. Made a scared choice, Marisol said. There's a difference. You told him that yourself, according to him. He repeated it to me word for word like it's the only thing he thinks about anymore. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either, and that was enough for Marisol. 3 days later, I got a different call, not from Marisol, from Lily. Adrian's phone, but Lily's small, careful voice on the other end, clearly having stolen a moment when her father wasn't looking. Noah, are you coming back? Daddy says you're not, but he says it in his sad voice, and that's the same voice he uses about my other dad, and I don't want you to be like my other dad. I don't want you to just be a picture in a folder. I had to sit down. My chest hurt in a way I didn't have a name for. Lily, sweetheart, that's not... Please come back, she said, and then quieter, like she was scared to ask. Daddy needs someone to stay this time. I heard him say that, to Marisol. He said it real quiet like he didn't want anyone to hear, but I heard. The line went dead a second later, Adrian's voice audible in the background asking what she was doing with his phone, and I sat there holding my own phone long after the call ended, and I made a decision I'd been circling for 2 weeks without letting myself land on it. I went back, not because Adrian called. Not because he apologized first, because a 6-year-old girl had done something braver than her father had managed in 3 years, and I wasn't about to let that bravery go unanswered. I didn't call ahead. I took the same rideshare route back to the same gray marble foyer, and I stood in the exact spot I'd stood 2 months earlier on my first day, and I waited. Adrian came down the stairs slower than I'd ever seen him move, like he couldn't quite believe what he was looking at. Noah, I'm not here because you asked, I said. I'm here because Lily asked, and because I think you're too scared to ask for the thing you actually need, so I'm going to make you say it instead of letting you off the hook. His jaw worked, something breaking open behind his controlled exterior. I don't know how to do this without being terrified I'm going to lose you the same way. You're not going to lose me by loving me, Adrian. You lost Daniel to a truck running a red light. That's not the same thing as choosing to let someone in. You've spent 3 years treating grief like a warning label, like the accident proves love is dangerous, but all it proves is that life is unpredictable. That's true whether you let people in or not. I know that, he said, his voice cracking properly this time. I know that with my whole mind, and none of the rest of me believes it. Then believe it a little at a time, I said. Starting now, say the thing you're too scared to say. He crossed the space between us in 3 steps, and this time when he kissed me there was nothing tentative in it at all. Love you, he said against my mouth, like the words had been sitting behind his teeth for weeks waiting for permission. I love you and it terrifies me, and I fired you anyway because loving you scared me more than losing you did, which doesn't even make sense except it does in the worst possible way, and I am so sorry. I love you too, I said. And I'm not Daniel, and I'm not going anywhere just because you're scared. You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. That's not protection. That's just a different kind of losing me, except this time it would have been your choice instead of an accident. He pulled back just enough to look at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was nothing guarded in his expression at all. Rule 11 is officially retired, he said. Good, I said. Because I have a lot of questions about your first boyfriend in college, and I intend to ask every single one of them. That surprised a real laugh out of him, the unguarded kind I'd only ever heard a handful of times, and Lily came running down the stairs at the sound of it, and she barreled into both of us at once, small arms not quite reaching all the way around either of our waists, and none of us seemed to mind starting there. 6 months later, I was still in that house, and it had stopped feeling like his house and started feeling slowly, carefully like ours. Adrian didn't hide anything anymore. When another photographer eventually caught us again, this time walking Lily to her first day of first grade, hands linked, nothing careful or distant about the space between us, Adrian didn't call his lawyers. He posted the photo himself on his own account with a caption that read simply, "My family." All of it finally out loud. It made headlines for exactly one day, and then, the way these things go, stopped being news at all because there was nothing scandalous left to report. Just a father and the man he loved, and a little girl who no longer had to whisper the truth on stolen phone calls. Marisol cried when she saw it. Lily made us frame it in the front hallway, right where the marble foyer had once felt so cold and unwelcoming. Some nights, we still talk about Daniel. Adrian doesn't flinch at his name anymore, and Lily asks about him openly now, curious the way kids are supposed to be allowed to be curious. And Adrian answers her every time with the kind of steady honesty that used to terrify him. I asked him once on the terrace where we'd first admitted the truth to each other, whether he ever regretted letting the 11th nanny stay. He took my hand the same way he had that first night, except there was nothing tentative in it now. "I regret the 10 I didn't," he said, "but I've spent every day since figuring out how to make up for that." He didn't fire the 11th nanny, he married him instead, and in that house that once felt too big and too quiet for anyone to belong in, there is, finally, exactly enough love to fill it.